I struggle to hold the hammer with this glove. It's better, but gotta try these. Safety first. Boy, is it hot out there. So finally back in the house, I thought I'd kind of show you guys what we're working on here. This, this is a real Nepalese kukri. This is for a group of military individuals referred to as the Gurkha. All right, it's a real thing, man. This is from the 1800s. It's as old as they come. What a wonderful, wonderful tool. It's in perfect shape. I mean, this thing is just beautiful. And what I'm going to be building is that knife, smaller, for a friend of mine. So I'm trying to work on designs here for this. You can kind of see, actually, what we're going for is a much smaller knife. All right, much, much, much smaller knife. I think I'm going to go with this size blade. I I've drawn up several different variants of this just to try to, figure out how I want to do it and sort of some of the nuances. Like I like this piece here that sticks down that would keep your hand from slipping up the blade. This full design is probably close to what I'll be using, but I think I'm going to go with this blade length. All right, so what I'll probably end up doing is making the blade and then working the tang down as I'm forging until it gets to a point that my hand is able to hold on to. Because you can see this is obviously way too small. This is more realistic. I don't like it being that thin though, it'll break too easily. So we'll probably go with something like this, which is pretty similar to what this is. So this blade is yay width, but it'll shrink down to about this for a tang inside of there. So much smaller by comparison. So this, if it's full tang, should work just fine. All right, that should work just fine. So we're going to go for that. And I've got handle material that'll work well for this as well. So probably this knife with a little more of this blade style. These are slightly different from one another. But yeah, that's what we're going for. Now, I also had the opportunity while I was out there today to finish up my Maker's Mark. So the Maker's Mark I was going for, I came up with, I don't know, a few weeks back, I guess, was something like this. All right. I've lost a little piece, but it's supposed to be a pair of J's that make an H with the middle there. So to accomplish this task, I sat down and I drew it out on a sheet of paper like this, real small, and then I took an old punch, right? Took an old punch, cut the end of that punch off, and I drew it on the end, and then quickly realized that this thing had to be, sorry, we just finished lunch here at the house, that's why everybody's asleep at me. Took this old punch and cut the end of it off and drew my H on there. But the problem is that, as I came to realize shortly thereafter, it actually has to be in reverse. It's got to be a mirror image. Okay, so then I went back through, I redrew on the end of my punch that I cut off with a reverse image, J's and H's. And now what I ended up with is, let's see if you can see that. That right there. All right, so I went in with my Dremel and my angle grinder and I drew out my J's and H's. And what I end up with, let's get a little piece of wood out here, folks. What I end up with is something like, let me just put a little pressure on there. Something like, well, you can't even see it. Let's try again. This time with a little more pressure. Something like that. Just not far off. It's unique enough that I can live with it. You can kind of tell what we're dealing with here. And it's in steel. So what you saw me out there doing is I went ahead and hardened the tip on this. So this, again, was a good punch. All right, I have 1,000 punches that I picked up over the years. So sacrificing one to build a Maker's Mark is not the worst idea on the planet. I took the punch, and after I cut the end of it off, I went ahead and softened it up. So I took my torch and I heated the end of this thing up till it was, really glowing. And then I just set it down overnight and just let it cool. So what that does is it softens the steel and allowed me to kind of carve this in with greater ease. And then I went in after carving it and put it in the forge. You saw me put it in the forge and got it super hot. And then pulled it out and immediately quenched it in quenching oil, and that's got this thing real hard now. It's very, very hard. I should have no problems stamping steel with it. I may anneal it a little bit, but I'm super happy. Real pleased with what we've got. So yeah, I've got my Maker's Mark, I've got my design set up, and I've got my knife steels all sitting out there and ready and waiting. So by this stage, they should have cooled down. Let's go take a look. Oh, it's been probably an hour since the forge went off, and you can guarantee it's still fiery hot. Oh yeah, it's been an hour and that thing is still fiery hot. Now the outside of this, I could touch it It wouldn't feel good, but I could touch it. All right. The inside, however, is like the gates of hell. Still, it's not glowing anymore, but I bet if I cut the light out, you'd be surprised. What a cool forge, man. So this thing has an inch and a half of what they call kale wool fiber mat, and that's then sealed off with refractory cement. I cut a hole in the back of this thing to allow me to get a knife in and out. Oh man, it works so good. Runs off of propane. Like, you can sit right beside it. It's not terribly hot, but if you get anywhere near the front of it, it's cranking. So what a neat system. It keeps the heat right there. That's the only place that's really that hot. Everything else stays nice and cool. Like, you can walk up here and just grab a hold of the burner on the top, and it's cool when the forge is at forging temperature. What a neat setup. Really like it. But here's our knife steel down here. Let's feel this. Make sure it's not. Yeah, it's still too hot to touch. Well, not too hot to touch, but too hot to hold. Now this is super duper thick. Let me grab some tongs here. It's real thick metal still. You can see here what we're dealing with. It's very thick, very, very thick indeed. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow me to forge down. I've already got my tip sort of on there. It's going to allow me to forge this out, just starting at the end and working my way down to make that kukri shape. So this is going to be the kukri, and I'll just make it until I'm happy, and then I'll cut off whatever's left. We'll use that for something else. And then this piece here, so this is all an old railway strap that I think I might have shown in an earlier video. This piece is going to become a knife for a coworker of mine. He wants an old style native trapper knife. Something like this over here. Let me get some lights on here. Something like that. Okay, he wants an old trapper's knife, something like that. And that's what that piece of steel there will become. So I've got the kukri nut steel set out, and I've got the trapper knife steel set out, and it should work pretty well. I guess now is as good a time as ever to sort of walk through the tools that I use and how I like them. So let's do that. Well, first things first. So I've got my piece of rail here from, oh man, he's going to have to help me in the comments. Billy's Railroad Emporium. the all-powerful Billy's Railroad Emporium. What a nice setup. I really love it. Like, it's a piece of rail, so it's not going to work quite as well as an anvil, but it's got decent rebound, and it works like a charm. Just does everything I need to do. I'm not building really huge stuff, so I don't need a massive chunk of steel anvil. I mean, I'd love to have one, but I don't have a lot of space. And this little setup here is just perfect. I've got my nice big leg vise on one side. I've got my piece of steel here for forging on, and I love my hammer. I think I paid $5 for that hammer or something along those lines. Now, I have run into a problem with the hammer, and that is that it's too hard to hold. Right? My grip strength. One of the first things I noticed now that I've been in COVID isolation for a year is that my grip strength is just gone. Like, I haven't forged anything in a long time, and my grip strength is just not there. I can't hold things. Like, I haven't been doing any kind of manual labor that would require it. So what I'm going to have to do is figure out some way to get better friction on this handle, and I refuse to wrap the end of it in tape or something. That's just ridiculous. So what I'll probably do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to carve on this handle some cool design work, a little bit of neat design work. Probably, let's be honest, probably something Norse in its descent for whatever reasons. I think it'd be kind of cool. But what that'll actually do is, by carving in the handle, it'll allow me to grip the hammer more easily. So it'll increase the amount of friction. It'll be like adding friction ridges to the outside of it, which will work great. I figured that out when I built my hatchet, which I don't see offhand, but it's around here someplace, that the carving on the handle actually increases the ability to hold on to it, which works great. Now I've got all of my gear kind of thrown up here because I just got done with the forge, but I've got all of my tools set out that I like to use. So these are actually for turning charcoal briquettes and stuff in a fireplace, but I find that they are awesome for reaching into the forge and pulling out whatever you got to work with and sitting it on the edge, so that you can then come back with a good pair of tongs, or these are actually clippers, but they work as tongs, and grabbing what you need for the actual forging process. And you know, it just depends on what you're working with and how big it is and how far away you need to be from the fire as to what you use. And I've got a whole setup of stuff here for various purposes and uses, and they work great. Like, I'm super pleased. Like, I've got everything I need really for the process. All I could use at this stage is a nice power hammer, but that ain't happening. So in terms of refining the blade once it's been forged out, I tend to kind of start on the grinder and get any kind of big stuff off, and the brush is ever present in my life. But most of the work's done on this little 1x30 belt grinder, and it just does wonders. What a nice tool. Like, it's hard to hurt yourself on it, believe it or not, if you're not acting like a complete fool, and it just works great. I've got a whole pile of knife making supplies and stuff down there, and just all kind of really nice equipment. I've got some nice mahogany I'm going to use for my handles this time around. It's exciting. It's exciting. So yeah, I've got 4 knives to build in the relatively near future. The first one's going to be the kukri. The second one's going to be that trapper knife. And then the third one I'm kind of up in the air on, but I think I might try to make a chef's knife for an old friend of mine back in Laurinburg. She doesn't even know that this is happening, but it's going to happen. And I think I might use some really fancy steel in order to accomplish that. So I've got some good known steel here. Got some 1080 and some 15N20, and I have ordered a nickel anode. All right, and that nickel is going to be pretty neat. It's going to be a pretty tricky thing that we're going to do with that, but if it works, it's going to be pretty friggin' wild. And my knife design is going to be marginally reflective of that right there. Okay, so we're going to go with something like this. Generally speaking, for knife design, probably a little skinnier with a little more depth down there. So my goal is that when my knuckles are down, I want the blade down pre-knuckle. All right, that's the idea with what I'm going for once the handle's on. And yeah, that's a good start. There's one more after that, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. And we are making progress. So the forge is back up and running. We have begun the process. I've never forged out steel that freaking thick before, and I'm here to tell you, it's not easy. So it's going to be an exciting time, especially when my hands aren't prepared. But we're going to see what we can do and do our best with what we got. So yeah, I think that's got it. And you guys have a good day. Later.